WWF Raw for Nintendo Game Boy, released in 1994 courtesy of LJN, maker of toys, and Real-Time Associates. So, spoiler alert everybody, this game fucking blows. I don't know what else to tell you. This is a truly wretched video game, much less a wrestling video game, which back in the days of 8-bit Nintendo and monochrome Game Boy, weren't all winners is you. However, while I could just end the video right then and there, I might as well go into slightly more detail, if only to justify the footage that I have here playing the game, which in hindsight is probably a little more than what I actually need, but regardless, we'll press onwards because whatever, I don't care. So WWF Raw for Game Boy is an 8-bit portable version of the 16-bit game of the same name that graced the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, and even the Sega 32X for some reason. Now to recap the WWF Raw game that graced those 16-bit systems, it was the third such WWF game in a series that comprised Super WrestleMania and Royal Rumble. Although if you want to include the Sega CD-only Rage in the Cage game, you could, but I always considered that to be an extended version of the Royal Rumble game anyway, so whatever. In any case, this Raw game featured 12 WWF superstars, with each one mostly playing the same way, but what distinguished each wrestler were their stats, their one finishing move, and their one mega move. Gameplay comprised beating your opponent to a pulp using punches, kicks, and grapple moves, accomplished by mashing buttons to win a tug-of-war. It's a far cry from your Fire Pro Wrestling games, but it was a fun little wrestling title if you're willing to give it a shot, and a chance for that matter. WWF Raw on Game Boy is naturally a stripped-down version of that game, with only 8 out of the 12 WWF superstars making the cut, some basic match options, and fewer buttons. And that means fewer buttons to mash when trying to win the tug-of-wars in this game. For some reason, what was somewhat tolerable on the consoles is all of a sudden a deal breaker on the Game Boy, is trying to get the meter to fill ends up being more of a chore than a struggle or even a challenge, even on the easiest difficulty. This is pretty much the majority of the gameplay in Raw, and it's not pleasant. You have 3 match types in WWF Raw: singles, tag team, or partake in the 4-on-4 Survivor Series match. From there, you have 3 more options: one fall, brawl, or tournament. One fall is a regular match where you win via pinfall or submission, or even countout. Brawl requires you to deplete your opponent's health, knocking him out essentially. And tournament is the usual beat all the other wrestlers to win the game sort of thing, assuming you have the patience for such tripe. Control is generally stiff and unresponsive, which probably explains why the tug-of-war grapples feel pointless, forcing me to stick with strikes and kicks. On top of that, hit detection is terribly flawed, almost feeling like a luck of the draw trying to hit somebody, rather than anything that requires precision timing or the like. Trying to go for a pinfall attempt is something of a scientific endeavor, rather than something that is fairly straightforward in other 8-bit wrestling titles. It almost reminded me of trying to pin a downed opponent on the original WrestleMania game on the NES, which is not a good thing, by the way. The only thing I can really credit here are the graphics. Well, the mugshots at least, since they appear to be halfway decent renderings of the 8 superstars featured in this video game. The rest of the game is fairly average visual fare. You have a decently sized wrestling ring with some smallish but still distinguishable characters in action, a hot full house, which is odd considering the time frame this game was made in. The animation is pretty poor, but to be fair, it's not like the 16-bit iterations were any better in the animation department. On a whole, WWF Raw nails the looks for the most part, and that's all it really has going for it, for whatever that's worth. In the music department, you have some respectable renditions of the Monday Night Raw theme that played at the time, and the various wrestler themes, but you'll mostly be listening to the Raw theme throughout the main gameplay portions, and that gets tiresome after a while. Sound effects are minimal, and I do mean minimal. They exist in some form or fashion, but you'd barely notice them because the Raw theme lasts forever. Overall, and I've already said this on the top of this video, so it shouldn't be much of a revelation by this point, WWF Raw on Game Boy fucking blows. What worked on the 16-bit systems where you had plenty of buttons to work with does not work on the tiny 8-bit system with only 2 buttons and a couple colors. There's no fun factor, the gameplay is so frustratingly bad that it's actually frustrating. Oh come on, nobody's gonna get that. He hasn't been relevant in years. More often than not, trying to turn a 16-bit video game into an 8-bit one, especially on a portable format, has mixed results leaning downwards, with some titles being exceptions to the rule. This is not one of those exceptions. Now, I normally don't rate anything in these reviews, but if I were to rate this game, then I would rate WWF Raw for Nintendo Game Boy minus more stars than there are stars in the universe, and the universe is infinite.